We are on the line of position. We are running north and south. Through heavy static and zero visibility, these disjointed words crackled over the radio. The pilot reported they were running out of fuel, completely blind in the sky. Beneath their struggling aircraft lay nothing but the dark, crushing expanse of the Pacific Ocean. If the engine stopped, there was nowhere to land. The voice on the radio belonged to Amelia Earhart. By 1937, she was the most recognizable and celebrated female pilot in the world. She had already set multiple aviation records, but she had one final, massive ambition: to become the first woman to successfully fly entirely around the globe. She intended for this journey to be the crowning achievement of her career, the ultimate test of her endurance and skill before stepping back from extreme long-distance flying. On July 2, 1937, that journey reached its most dangerous phase. She took off to cross the widest, most unforgiving stretch of the Pacific. When her plane vanished a few hours later, the world's most famous aviator instantly became the subject of history's most enduring aviation mystery. The final leg of the flight began at an isolated outpost in Lae, New Guinea. To the east lay thousands of miles of open water. Earhart wasn't alone on this journey. She relied heavily on her navigator, Fred Noonan. His ability to calculate their position using the stars and sun was the only thing keeping them from flying blindly into oblivion. To survive the long crossing, their twin-engine Lockheed Electra was heavily modified. The cabin was stripped and loaded with extra gas tanks, carrying enough fuel for thousands of miles of continuous flight. Their target was Howland Island. It is a completely flat, uninhabited strip of coral and sand barely a mile and a half long. This animated map demonstrates the scale of their problem.
Watch as Howland Island scales down to a single blinking point, completely swallowed by millions of square miles of blank blue grid. Finding it required absolute mathematical perfection. In 1937, navigation relied on early, primitive radio direction finding. If the weather blocked the stars, or if the radio antennas failed, they had no backup systems. The geography of the Pacific dictated the rules. Even a 1-degree error in Noonan's calculations would send them hundreds of miles off course, with no fuel to correct the mistake. Back on Earth, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland Island, straining to lock on to her signal. As the morning wore on, the radio room grew increasingly tense. Earhart's voice periodically broke through the static. She explicitly reported that they were flying over the target area, but could not see the island below them. And then, the transmission snapped. The communications stopped entirely. No Mayday was called. No emergency SOS was ever broadcast. The silence was absolute. In the hours and days that followed, no oil slicks appeared on the surface. No luggage, seat cushions, or aluminum debris washed ashore. The United States government immediately mobilized. The Navy and Coast Guard launched one of the most expansive search operations the world had ever seen. Battleships and aircraft swept across vast grid coordinates, scanning hundreds of thousands of square miles of empty ocean surface. Despite throwing the full weight of the military at the Pacific, they found absolutely nothing. The failure to locate a single piece of evidence froze the case in time. Over 80 years later, that total lack of physical evidence has fractured investigators into two heavily debated camps. The first is the crash theory. It relies on the simplest logic. The Electra burned through its final drops of gas, ditched into the sea, and sank into the abyss before a signal could be sent. The second is the castaway theory. This hypothesis argues that Noonan navigated them along a different line of position, eventually crash landing on a remote, uncharted coral reef. Under the castaway theory, the reality is far more grim. It suggests Earhart and Noonan survived the landing, only to die of thirst and exposure while waiting for a rescue ship that was never coming. Both sides present compelling arguments, yet neither has produced a single undeniable piece of wreckage that the wider scientific community accepts as proof. We now map the ocean floor with autonomous submersibles and high-resolution sonar, yet the Pacific continues to keep its secret hidden. Earhart's final flight remains a stark reminder of the limits of human daring when confronted by the immense, indifferent power of nature. The evidence runs cold right at the edge of Howland Island.
So, as you look at the facts of that July morning, what do you think really happened to Amelia Earhart?